told...
Do you agree with her targeting conservative groups was wrong? That's a yes and no. Do you agree it was wrong? Can someone in the IRS admit that this was wrong?
I think the information that was released this week by our acting commissioner shows that BOLO lists were inappropriately used across multiple criteria. So yes, that criteria was incorrect.
So the IRS is screwed up. Somebody needs to be held accountable. Who is in charge of appointing the commissioner of the IRS?
That's a presidential appointment.
Okay. All right. Well, somebody needs to be held responsible. Do you agree?
All of us at IRS have to be responsible for the administration of our agency.
Okay. The American people are going to be very relieved when they get this news of who might be held accountable. Do you have any ideas who might be held accountable? Do you think you should be?
I think the investigation that's underway, that's exactly what this is intended to do. As our acting commissioner, Danny Warfel, has stated numerous times, we all want to get to the truth.
Well, the American people want us to get to the truth, so thank you for being here today and helping us in that process. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Ms. Tucker, the gentleman asked you, did you think it was wrong to target conservative groups, and you said it was incorrect. Could you answer the gentleman's question, was it wrong?
So, Chairman Issa, I feel compelled that I need to make sure that everyone understands the meeting that I was in when Russell George and his team came in to share just their routine, here are the audits we have underway. Mr. George at that time basically said, we are initiating an audit.
No, that's not the question, and I apologize. The doctor asked you a fairly straightforward question, which is, as one of the highest career professionals in the IRS, you are now aware a legitimate answer to people's applications based on their ideology.
In that meeting.
I'm not asking about the meeting. I'm asking about what is now known.
So when TIGTA issued their final report, in April, early May of this year, yes, I think all of us at IRS that saw the report are troubled. Thus, the investigation to get to the bottom of exactly what
Ms. Tucker, I'm just asking about right or wrong, and that's what the doctor was asking about. Not was it incorrect, but this is virtually a simple question for almost every citizen to answer. Was it right or wrong to do what you now know from the IG's report? Was it right or wrong?
Sir, here's what I'm on what was told.
Okay, I'm not going to get an answer, and I don't have any time. I think, Mr. Davis, you are next up.
I think I am, Mr. Chairman, and I thank you very much, and I want to thank all of the witnesses. But I also want to thank you and the ranking member for holding this hearing. I think we've learned a great deal, or we've had, for some of us, reinforcement of thinking and thoughts. Especially do I want to relate myself to the questioning of the ranking member and that of Delegate Norton, whose question revealed that so often in communities that are designated to benefit from program activity, that there are ways to manipulate, to scheme, and get around to the point where the designation means absolutely nothing to the community or neighborhood that is supposed to benefit. And for those who have helped create hub zones, been advocates for them, they look for the benefit that's to come. Didn't see much benefit from this particular business transaction. So, Mr. Chodas, let me ask you about the finding in the SBA decertification letter that Mr. Castillo and his company tried to pass off employees as contractors to skirt the hub zone rules and collect or earn millions of dollars. On May 20th, and in that letter, the director of the hub zone program found that Mr. Castillo erroneously characterized individuals as contractors rather than employees. in order to maintain the 35% eligibility requirement for the Hub Zone program. Mr. Chodes, how would you classify someone as a contractor rather than an employee? Help Mr. Castillo's application.
If I understand your question, Representative Davis, is when the facts came to our attention that the people who were running the company, essentially, or in managerial charge of the company, were listed as independent contractors rather than as employees, we look to the substance rather than the form of whether or not they are actually employees of the company, and we were able to determine that under a totality test that, in fact, they were, for all meaningful purposes, employees of the company, and thus the test was not met.
Well, let me read from the SBA certification letter, if I might, and it says this. SCI is telling the government two different stories. To the Internal Revenue Service, the individual is a valued and key member of Signet's management team. Yea, she is merely an independent contractor. In SBA's view, a firm's management team and its program manager are not roles that are to third parties. Ms. Tucker, let me ask you, why is it important to procurement officials that they know who the proposed program manager is for a particular contract?
Sir, from the folks in our procurement organization, from what they tell me, as we are interacting on contracts like the one that we're talking about today, the project manager is indispensable in communicating with the Internal Revenue Service business owners to make sure whatever service or product we're contracting for is being delivered appropriately. So that is very important.
Mr. Castillo, let me, and I agree with you that you didn't make the rules. You didn't write the regulations. You didn't pass the bills. So you did not create the opportunities that existed for you to try and do business under these arrangements. But let me ask, how do you explain telling the Internal Revenue contract and then telling the Small Business Administration that that person is an independent contractor?
So the person is an independent contractor in that she works in support of several companies. I think she supported our company and SAIC at that time and was a 1099 employee. A program manager, while I understand that it's important, it doesn't necessarily make that person an employee. And I would tell you, being in the consulting field, that a program manager can be contracted out and is often contracted out, as we serve as a contractor on the IBM contract that Ms. Tucker.
But you knew that. But you knew that before it was brought to your attention by either the SBA or the Internal Revenue Service. I'm saying you knew that as a result of your knowledge and experience and the work that you've done, but yet you described it two different ways.
Well, I think they're both consistent. I think that they're an important member of the team, and we bid them as the program manager on the job, as they've been bid programmer on other jobs through other companies. And the distinction we made with the other ones was that one was the other person actually owned a company and supported five other companies, and the other one didn't even work for us. She supported us during her maternity leave. She did it as a favor to me during her maternity leave.
My time has expired, so thank you very much. But nevertheless, you described two different ways when you were dealing with the procurement opportunity. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you. The Chair now recognizes the gentleman from South Carolina, Mr. Gowdy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I also want to thank my friend from North Carolina for yielding me his time. And, Mr. Chairman, I want to thank our colleague from Illinois for her service to our country, her moral standing to discuss service and sacrifice is unimpeachable. So I want to publicly thank you again for your service to our country. Ms. Tucker, more people have invoked their Fifth Amendment privilege against self-incrimination in this job than they did in my former job. And I was a prosecutor, so that's saying a lot. And 2 of them are current government employees. And just so there's no misunderstanding, they're invoking their Fifth Amendment privilege in connection with their official duties. We're not discussing bank robberies or narcotics trafficking. We're discussing their official duties, and they feel the need to invoke their Fifth Amendment privilege. So I want to ask you to do something for me, okay? Have you seen the text from Mr. Roseman?
Yesterday, when the committee released the report, yes, sir.
Okay,
I've
so
seen
you
it,
have
sir.
seen these despicable homophobic slurs.
Yes, sir, I saw the information in the committee report.
Well, here's what I'm going to ask you to do. For me and frankly for our fellow citizens, before the close of business today, if you can, issue a statement on behalf of the IRS as to why he's still employed and still drawing a paycheck. If you've seen the text that I have seen, I would like an explanation as to how you can keep your job if you say things he said in your official capacity. Can you do that? Can you explain to us how you can keep your job and your paycheck despite these homophobic slurs?
So if I might, as I said in my opening statement, based on the information in the committee report yesterday, I am sickened.
All right.
Not only as
I appreciate that, Ms.
not
Tucker.
only as an IRS official, but
I really
also
do.
as a citizen.
I appreciate that. My question was actually a little more specific. Can you issue a statement by 5 o'clock today as to how someone who used this language in their official capacity as a government employee is still employed and drawing a paycheck? Can you explain that to us by close of business today?
Sir, if I might, we are having discussions at Internal Revenue Service.
How long do you anticipate those discussions are going to last? Because I just read the text this morning, and I've already reached my conclusion. So how long do you think it's going to take you all?
So we are having discussions with our general counsel.
How about close of business tomorrow?
So we're going to do our very best to follow due process, but candidly to also make sure we do this appropriately, because I think the committee's aware of the federal personnel rules. And we
If
want...
this doesn't violate them, Ms. Tucker, then we need to change them.
Yes, sir, we are doing everything we can to make
All
sure
right.
that we
Well,
follow the proper procedures.
I'm going to be anxiously awaiting an explanation as to how you can say what this person said in your official capacity and keep your job and keep your paycheck. I will anxiously await that explanation. Mr.
Yes.
Castillo, why did Mr. Roseman invoke his Fifth Amendment privilege?
I have no idea, sir.
You don't know? You don't know what conduct he could be worried about?
Well, I think you spoke about one of them, but no, sir, I don't know why he did, and I wish he was here to speak about some of
Well,
this.
we do too, Mr. Castillo, but he's not, so I'll direct my questions to you.
Okay.
Did you discuss his invoking his Fifth Amendment privilege with him before today?
No, sir, I did not.
When's the last time you talked to him?
Before February 20th.
Do you know what criminal exposure he's concerned about?
No, sir, I don't.
You don't have any idea?
No, sir.
Do you ever solicit gifts from you?
No, sir, he did not.
Do you ever offer gifts to him?
I think it's noted in the,
Well, humor me and answer it again.
so we went to a ball game around the 2005 timeframe when I worked at Government Acquisitions that he paid for. I gave him a receipt. And
Has he discussed employment with you post-IRS?
no, sir, he has not.
Will you describe the nature of your relationship with Mr. Roseman to us?
I would say that it's centered on my doing business with the IRS and his for 10 years or so.
Did you discuss contracts that you were competing for or interested in with Mr. Roseman prior to the issuing of those contracts or the awarding of those contracts?
Not to my, well, I'm not sure I understand the question, sir. Did we discuss contracts beforehand?
I'm trying to figure out whether or not you violated any of the bidding procedures, whether or not he gave you an unfair advantage if you were seeking work that other people were also seeking.
No, sir, I'm not aware that I have an unfair advantage in any of them.
How about any advantage, unfair or fair? Did his relationship with you give you an advantage?
No, sir.
You've never discussed future employment with him?
No, sir.
Well, this is my last question because my time has run out. Mr. Castillo, have you read the text from Mr. Roseman?
I have read them, sir. I provided them to the committee.
All right. And you still say he's your friend?
So, to be clear,
No, I want you to be clear because I just read them, and I want you to be clear. You've read them. You know what's in them. The homophobic slurs in his official capacity. Y'all still friends?
I'm deeply offended. As you're aware, those were targeted towards me.
Yeah, I am. That's why I'm asking you.
So I am offended. If you can appreciate that he's the customer, and it's not my job to go around correcting what the customer does or doesn't say. And
You think it's appropriate for a government employee to say those things about someone?
No, sir.
In their official capacity?
No, sir.
How long would it take you to get rid of an employee that said that?
Well, I think it's well noted of some of the employees that we've terminated. It would not take me.
Yeah, for a lot less.
It would not take me until 5 o'clock.
You did it a lot quicker for a lot less.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Gowdy, if I might, my folks that are here in the room believe that the specific text message that you're referring to, we actually have not seen yet at IRS.
Would you like me to walk them down to you?
I would like at some point to receive those, but let me just be clear. When I said that I was deeply disturbed, that was based even on the text messages that were already in the report.
Well, here, let me make sure that you get them before you leave.
No,
because if you thought you were deeply disturbed, you may reach a whole nother level of disturbia.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate that.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes the gentlewoman from Illinois, Ms. Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This committee serves two purposes, oversight and reform, and I'd like to get to what reform your agencies are looking at. We have seen how a contractor has been able to game the hub zone system to get an advantage on his competitors for millions in government contracts. And I want to know how we're going to prevent this from happening in the future. Mr. Chodos, is the SBA taking any remedial steps in light of the findings of this case?
Thank you, Representative Kelly. Let me say that the agency did take an immediate step when it found out that there was a problem back in December and January at the end of last year and the beginning of this year, which was to decertify this firm after duly looking into the facts and getting the correct facts. So in terms of moving forward, the agency is always looking for opportunities to make the program more effective and to identify ways to work closely with our colleagues at VA and at GSA to align and coordinate our different rules about procurement so that they all work in the same direction. So we have proposed rules under the Jobs Act that are in process now as we speak that seek to make issues involving use of the hub zone program clearer, more straightforward, and which will improve our opportunities for straightforward oversight.
Mr. Davis read the decertification letter already, but is SBA considering asking applicants to provide information identifying not only employees but all other individuals who work on behalf of the company, such as contractors?
Yes, and I believe that change has already been instituted.
Great. As committee staff interviewed IRS procurement officials, they also identified that those personnel needed additional training about procurement ethics generally, as well as specific training about the types of relationships that IRS procurement officials are prohibited from having with contractors. Ms. Tucker, can you please describe the steps the IRS has taken to improve its procurement ethics training?
Yes, ma'am. We have a whole host of actions underway. including an annual ethics training that will be provided to all of our procurement employees, in addition to what they already have, that will be delivered by our Chief Counsel organization. And in fact, we're doing an all-employee meeting today with our workforce to reemphasize that the positions we hold, ethics is the utmost importance. And so I can assure you and give you personal assurance that our training programs will be significantly enhanced in the days and weeks ahead.
Is there any other remedial action that you're taking that you would like to share?
The findings regarding the, what I believe, totally inappropriate relationship between one of our procurement employees and Mr. Castillo, while I believe at my core that the men and women of our procurement organization are operating with the highest ethics and integrity every day, I know that one bad actor can cast disparity on our organization. And so as a result, we're doing a top-to-bottom review of our entire procurement organization, just reassuring ourselves that we're following proper policy and procedures. I've also asked the Treasury Department, procurement executive, they do routine reviews of IRS. I've asked them to come in. I've also launched an independent review. And in addition, I think the focus that we're going to be putting on, more routine briefing. We do a quarterly performance review with the procurement organization. I think all of our existing internal controls, we just need to double down on to reassure ourselves that this type of behavior is not prevalent. And I have no reason to believe, ma'am, that it exists beyond what the unfortunate situation with Mr. Roseman.
All right, thank you. How about Mr. Sisk, anything to add?
We're currently continuing our review of this particular case to make sure all the proper rules and regulations were followed. In addition, we're taking a look at our internal management controls to see if they need to be strengthened in any particular areas in light of some of the questions that came out of the committee.
Okay. Mr. Floor?
Thank you, ma'am. In my particular area of expertise is veterans benefits, and so I don't have a lot of information about the SP, veteran-owned small businesses, but I will be glad to take any questions for the record and provide them to you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, and I hope we continue looking at this issue and make improvements to gain the public's trust back. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Meadows.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Tucker, some of the testimony you've given recently is very troubling because it's in direct conflict with testimony we've heard in this very room from Mr. George. And so with that, to make sure that we have a continuity, I'm going to yield some of my time back to Mr. Jordan at this particular point. So I yield to the gentleman from Ohio.
I thank the gentleman. Ms. Tucker, so you're number 2 at the Internal Revenue Service. You learned on May 30th from the Inspector General that political targeting of conservative groups is taking place. You know the number 1 at the IRS, 2 months prior to that, testified in front of Congress to just the opposite. And you told me in my first round of questioning that because it didn't fall under your jurisdiction, you didn't feel obligated to set the record straight?
Sir,
I mean, how does that encourage whistleblowers to come forward when they know something's been done wrong? If you're the number 2, the career professional IRS, and you don't come forward and set the record straight?
sir, if I might, and maybe I'm not making myself clear, the meeting that I was in, what Mr. George told, to the best of my recollection in the meeting, was that his team was opening an audit on the TEG organization, and that part of that audit is that they were looking at the BOLO list. Until, to the best of my recollection, sir, until Mr. George issued the report in April where he revealed that inappropriate targeting had appeared to have taken place based on the BOLO list, sir. That was the first time that I actually had seen the results of Mr. George's investigation.
Well, if I could, if the gentleman would cut me off when you need to, Congressman. According, this is from the hearing, the chairman asked Inspector General, May 30th, IG function heads briefed the IRS Commissioner Doug Shulman, Deputy Commissioners Miller and Tucker. Specifically, the criteria targeting Tea Party patriots and 912 and other words were used in reviewing applications for tax. You briefed, and that was your notes. Mr. George's response, yes, that's correct. So it was very specific. You were briefed on that day, and yet you didn't feel compelled to do anything.
Mr. George was briefing on the start, to my recollection, of their audit. And obviously, as he talked about that they were looking at these words being used, yes,
Well, the
that
gentleman
seems to be inappropriate.
I thank the gentleman.
Ms. Tucker, that's in direct conflict with what Mr. George said sitting on this end right here. What he said, that May 30th meeting, he went over preliminary results of the investigation that they've had and let you, Mr. Shulman, and Mr. Miller know in that meeting. It was not the start of an audit. It was the preliminary results where targeting actually happened. You don't recall that.
Sir, to go back.
Because I'm finding that a lot of members of the IRS have very great detail on recalling things at certain times, and at other they lack the memory. So you don't recall that he said that.
Sir, I recall the meeting, the monthly meetings that we have with Mr. George and his team.
And there was nothing unusual about this May 30th meeting. There was nothing unusual. It was a normal routine update that he saw fit to go 4 days later to Chief Counsel and let them know about it. That was Mr. George's testimony. Your testimony and his are not matching up.
Sir, I do not recollect, and I have to keep going back to this. In our monthly meetings with Mr. George and his team, they cover a whole host of IRS.
So there was nothing
audit
unusual about this particular time. That May 30th meeting, there was nothing unusual about that. This was just a normal routine update that you get every month.
Sir, obviously when Mr. George conveyed to the Internal Revenue Service that in the course of their examination or their audit, that they were looking into.
It was preliminary results, Ms. Tucker, not looking into. It was preliminary results where targeting was identified.
And sir, based on the testimony that I've seen from Mr. Miller, following that discussion, to the best of my recollection, is when he took action to ask for an independent review.
No, that happened actually before. So let me, because you earlier on, if the chair will indulge me for just a second, you earlier on said that this committee needs to continue to give you information. But yet you're the one that's paid for managing this whole organization. You're the one that gets paid for it. We have oversight. And yet what we're finding is we're having to discover and manage the process of which you're getting paid for. And here we are. You said 8 times, let me be clear. So let me be clear that the internal investigation that the IRS happened actually before May 30th. It was concluded the first part of May. It was started the day after Mr. Shulman gave testimony to the Ways and Means Committee saying that he could give assurances that there was no targeting, and y'all started an internal investigation the very next day. So your timelines don't match up, Ms. Tucker. So how do we respond to the American people? Because all they want, the ranking member has said it, they want truth so then yet again they can trust. So how do we respond to that?
The gentlelady may answer. The time has expired.
I thank the Chairman. I yield back.
Sir, I am trying to share with you the truth from what I know and what programs I have responsibility for. IRS is an organization of 100,000 people and multiple programs. I am the Deputy Commissioner for Operations Support. I do not have responsibility, sir, for oversight and administration of the service and enforcement programs.
I thank the gentlelady. We now go to the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Connolly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I might say to my colleagues, Mr. Meadows, Mr. Jordan, that if we're going to cite the testimony of the Inspector General, I would cite the question and answer period between the Inspector General and myself, in which I directly asked the Inspector General whether, in fact, progressive groups could also have been targeted in the unidentified 202 organizations that were looked at. And his answer, in light of recent facts, is at best elusive. And I certainly think that if we want to cite the Inspector General, we ought to have him come back here under oath, as he was that day we had him, and allow him to clarify his answers, because they certainly look strange to some observers.
Would the gentleman yield?
If the clock will stop.
Well, just if you could answer, what are you asking to have the IG come back and answer?
Mr. Chairman, I'd ask the clock to stop.
We'll hold the clock. But I just want to know,
Mr.
if you
Chairman,
have anything to request, what the request is.
Yeah, the request is that there is now serious confusion about the answer the Inspector General gave to my direct questioning, whether he knew that, in fact, progressive groups, not just conservative groups, were also in the filter in the BOLO. Did he know that when he answered my question? Because he inferred from his answer that he did not, that those were all unidentified. We now know that's not true. Now, did he know that? And did he know it when he testified under oath before this committee?
Okay, we'll look at how we could do that. Please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Will the gentleman yield?
I'm afraid my time is running out, so I'm going to proceed with questioning, but I thank my colleagues. During the course of the committee's investigation, it's become clear that Strongcastle provided inaccurate information to SBA on multiple occasions. Mr. Castillo, according to the SBA's letter decertifying Strongcastle, the company provided inaccurate payroll records for 2 employees. SBA's decision stated that Strongcastle, and I quote, admitted that the records provided were false and inaccurate. Is that correct?
They were inaccurate, yes.
They were inaccurate.
Yes, sir.
And the SBA decision goes on to explain, SCI confirmed the one instance identified by SBA and identified another. The corrections were only made after being confronted with the conflicting evidence presented by SBA. Strongcastle's former COO, Michelle Castillo, I guess that's your wife?
Yes, sir.
Said that when she discovered errors in the payroll record, she did not check to see whether there were additional errors in other months. When she was asked, how do you know there weren't other errors for the previous 6 months, she replied, I don't. Is that the kind of record keeping you kept at your company, Mr. Castillo?
Sir, I don't know of her testimony, but rest assured I am aware of the 2 that you're talking about, where a student worked 6 hours in one day and 8 hours in the other and transcribed those in that week, and that student employee had written that he'd worked 8 hours on one day when he meant that he worked the other day. So I'm aware of those. And so we have put steps in place, including the person that you had mentioned, my wife resigning from the company. I've taken over that. We've put steps in place to ensure that we have tighter record keeping around that, including assigning people on a day-to-day basis that log in hours and report and supervise hours.
Thank you. Mr. Chodos, how can SBA base certification decisions and payroll records from companies when they can't verify actual employment by their own admission?
Companies have a duty to provide accurate information to the SBA because, of course, the SBA needs accurate information on an ongoing basis in order to originally certify and then to decide if a company is still in compliance.
So is there sort of an honor system? We rely on them to verify and to tell the truth.
Well, we always expect folks to act in an honorable way, but the regulations require that they provide accurate information on an ongoing basis. So this is a regulatory requirement, not just a trust system.
In this case, the certification provided previously was the difference between, well, qualifying for a hub zone, but also the 35% residency requirement. Is that right?
I'm sorry, Representative, I just didn't understand the question.
The information provided by former employee Michelle Castillo meant that Strong Castle made the difference with the 35% residency requirement. Is that correct?
Yes,
So this wasn't just an error. This was sort of dispositive.
Well, this went to two issues. It went to whether the status of employees and whether or not employees were actually spending their time at the principal location as represented.
Is SBA looking into the issue in this case of fraud?
The SBA is continuing to receive information and has had a number of communications with the committee and welcomes all information on this topic. And also, as we have indicated to the committee, since at least March, the SBA has been in regular communication with our Inspector General and has shared all of the information available to us with our IG. So it's an ongoing process of evaluating information as it becomes available.
Thank you. My time has expired.
I thank the gentleman. We now recognize the gentleman from Michigan for his round of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of Congress are elected by the American people. We are expected to answer to our constituents. And every 2 years, they have the ability to fire us. The American taxpayers do not have the ability to do this with IRS officials who have repeatedly let them down. We saw this with the targeting of tax-exempt groups, with the egregious waste of taxpayer dollars on conference spending, and now again with the discovery of an improper relationship between an IRS procurement official and a contractor. It is not very common for witnesses to assert their privilege not to testify before Congress. But today, again, we have an IRS official who has refused to answer questions about actions he took in his official capacity. This is the second time in the last month that an IRS official has refused to answer this committee's questions. How many more IRS officials are going to come before this committee and refuse to answer to the American people? As it is, we are not learning all of the necessary facts because of these refusals to testify. This problem is not just about Strong Castle and Mr. Roseman's refusal to testify today. This problem is bigger than Strong Castle. This problem is about IRS mismanagement, the agency's failure to the American people, and the agency's refusal to answer for what it has done. And the American people deserve better. Mr. Chairman, I served in Iraq and Vietnam, and I am 50% disabled for a neck injury I suffered in 2007 in Iraq. Mr. Costello, I think Congresswoman Duckworth said it all for me. So I'm just going to ask you one simple question. Mr. Costello, I understand that you have produced text messages between yourself and Mr. Roseman that you have access to. There are, however, text messages that you have stated were lost in the iPhone migration. Will you agree to work with the committee and with AT&T in an attempt to recover these messages?
Yes, and I have.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Would the gentleman yield?
Yes.
I thank you. And thank you for helping us with AT&T, and we'll work on that after this meeting. I want to sort of dwell just a moment on, with Mr. Floor, on the veterans standing. In the transcribed interviews, which we'll make available to VA, Mr. Castillo has some little bit of confusion in his statement, but essentially, and I'll paraphrase, that he was aware that the doctor's view that this was a football injury was inaccurate, but didn't think it was material. If we provide that transcript to you, does that empower you to review and get accurate the original filing so that you can make an assessment as to whether or not the sequence of events, the injury, and the doctor's opinion would support all the elements necessary for a 30% disability?
Thank you for that question, Mr. Chairman. We would certainly be willing to look at anything that you might want to share with us. I'm not saying it would make a difference. As I said earlier in my testimony and written and oral statement, it's a veteran who suffers an injury in service, and regardless of what type of injury or what caused it, as long as it wasn't willful misconduct and it was in line of duty.
Now, I understand the line of duty. It's really, I think Ms. Duckworth made it very clear that she looked at a 30% and a $500 a month or so payment for life and questioned whether or not, in light of so many severe injuries, and she was incredibly severely injured in the line of duty, whether or not the assessment was correct. And I think her view, and rightfully so, is there's a lot of veterans on long waiting list, and there's a lot of veterans who see a 30% disability for what appears to be a relatively minor injury a long time ago, and they question that. That's the only reason that, in light of the testimony and the confusion, that we would expect that the VA would reopen, reevaluate, and then make a second accurate assessment based on, if you will, reevaluating the doctor's statement, which apparently was inaccurate. Having said that, I served for 10 years on active duty and 10 in reserves. Every one of us got something broken or bent. So I'm very aware that, for better or worse, almost all of us have a hearing loss or have something. Most people who served as veterans are, in fact, to at least some small extent, and the gentleman from Michigan is to a fairly large extent from a serious accident in Iraq, service-connected, disabled. And I think that's the point you were making, is Congress has left you little wiggle room if you're at the prep school, if something occurs and you are not in a criminal relationship, or you were in the line of duty, you're not AWOL, that in fact that is service-connected disability eligible. We're not asking you to rewrite the law. That's our job. But we do think that getting it right as to percentages are important to so many veterans who essentially say, I can't work, but they also often find themselves far below 50%.
As I stated, sir, yeah, we'll be glad to look at anything you have that you want us to look at, and we certainly will make you aware of what we find.
I appreciate that. We now go to the other gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Walberg.
I thank the Chairman. And, you know, I just responding to one of our colleagues who questioned whether we would be getting information from the IG on targeting. Certainly, I think we've come to realize that there were targeting bolos dealing with conservatives and religious groups and also progressives. The difference is progressives got their certifications. They were approved. The issue with the targeting of the non-progressive, supposedly, the conservative, the religious organizations, is they're still waiting for approvals. And that's unconscionable. Ms. Tucker, does Strong Castle's hub zone decertification affect the IRS contracts currently in place with the organization?
Sir, as I mentioned earlier, IRS is in the process of separating ourselves from Strong Castle.
So you plan to end contracts with Strong Castle?
It's our intention to begin the proceedings to separate ourselves from Strong Castle, yes.
What would keep you from separating with Strong Castle?
I'm not aware of anything that would prohibit us. That's what our folks in our council organization are reviewing today.
So we can expect that there will be a separation?
That is our intention, to separate ourselves from a relationship with Strong Castle.
So do you plan as well to stop ordering from the $266 million IBM contract that was awarded to Strong Castle in December of 2012?
Sir, as I mentioned earlier, the contracts in question, the one with laptops, IRS has never placed an order on that one, nor do we have any reason to do so. And our team has already begun the process to separate ourselves, the relationship with Strong Castle on the IBM contract as well.
Will any of the dollars obligated to Strong Castles count toward the IRS's small business goals?
So as I believe my colleague from SBA indicated earlier, The only time, and this is to my understanding, that those obligations go against the goal is if dollars are ultimately awarded to the contract. So no, based on the decertification, I'm looking to my colleague from SBA, it's my understanding that no, based upon the fact that Strongcastle has been decertified, and this is just my understanding, so I'm going to need some help from SBA.
Mr. Chodos?
That they would not count toward a small business award.
So ordinarily, Congressman, the decertifications are prospective. From the date of the certification, no further contract actions can occur with the entity as though it's certified, but contracts which have already been awarded or are being performed beforehand remain in effect unless there is an independent reason to terminate them. So if an award had been made and was performed, then it will be listed as a small business contract if it was before the certification. That also occurs with suspension and debarment when wrongdoing comes to our attention. Ordinarily, those actions are prospective.
Ms. Tucker, the Treasury Department recently recognized Strongcastle as the 2012 Small Business Prime Contractor of the Year. In light of recent developments, should this award be reconsidered?
Sirs,
just for the record.
So the recognition was given by the Department of Treasury. Strongcastle was not nominated by Internal Revenue Service, but I believe, this is my personal opinion, because I cannot speak for Treasury, I do think what has been revealed does cast doubt in my mind.
Well, I would hope so. And, Mr. Chairman, I would say these hearings that continue with the type of egregious culture of moral vacuum, I think I'd call it, going on, is just another example of big government and what we can expect to go amok. When we see a government so large that it is willing to allow these types of things happen, in fact, foster things like this happen, foster things because of friendships or otherwise. I mean, we've even seen it in the most recent Supreme Court decision, where we think more about personal desires than we do about the best good for children, or the best good for taxpayers, or the best good for our economy. We deal with promoting entities like this, and this is a perfect example of the worst case that can go on with big government. I see my time has expired.
I thank the gentleman for his time and his comments. We now go to the gentleman from Florida, Mr. DeSantis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I got to tell you, just the upshot of these past couple months, the IRS to me is an institution that is terminally ill. We had admission that the agency abused its power by targeting conservative groups, which effectively silenced a substantial number of Americans for the 2012 election. We had the IRS commissioner at that time come before us and asked if he accepted responsibility for the malfeasance, said, well, it happened on my watch, but I'm not responsible. Now, that would not fly in virtually any other aspect of American life. I'm a Navy guy. If a Navy ship runs aground and the captain of the ship were to say, well, yeah, we ran it aground on my watch, but that's actually some E5's responsibility because he messed up, you'd be gone immediately. Lois Lerner came in front of the committee, invoked her Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination rather than answering questions for the American people. Now, I think she waived her Fifth Amendment right. I think the committee is going to have something to say about that this week. But she's been placed on leave, but she's still with the agency. We had an interesting hearing in which an IRS official was questioned about lavish spending at conferences, suites, $3,500 a night, $50,000 plus for Star Trek parody video. And it's interesting, they didn't know exactly how much the video cost because they didn't keep receipts for the expenses, and all we got was an apology tendered. If the IRS were investigating an American and the American said they just didn't bother to keep receipts or offered an apology, that probably would not be the end of it. I think the IRS would hold them accountable and demand more. But yet, to my knowledge, we haven't gotten any accountability for this lavish spending and waste of taxpayer funds. It's, oh, we need better procedures, more training, this and that. And so here we are another day and another invocation of the Fifth Amendment. We see, to me, clear example of cronyism and waste of taxpayer money, but again, as my colleague from South Carolina, Mr. Gowdy, pointed out, no accountability. Ms. Tucker, I appreciate when you mentioned due process, but it seems to me, where's the due process for the American taxpayer? Why does the taxpayer always have to take the back seat? Why is there so little accountability in this incredibly powerful bureaucracy? It's almost as if the IRS has all this power, but some of their officials are held to a lower standard than what we would expect in private business or people, even in other aspects of the government, such as the military. And to me, that is not acceptable. And if that means we need to change some of the laws that govern this, then I think we absolutely have to do it. So I think this is a profound culture of arrogance in the IRS, and I think the American people are sick of it. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back the balance of my time.
Will the gentleman yield?
Yes, I will.
I think we have a video that I would ask that we queue up. It's a follow-up of some of the line of questioning that we had from Mr. Jordan and myself earlier. If we have that, if we can queue that up. I thank the chair.
I thank the gentleman, and I thank the gentleman from Florida. I would now recognize the ranking member for a closing statement.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Could you pause for a moment? I'm being told.
George, in exactly.
Oh, I'm sorry. If the gentleman, if the remaining time can be given to Mr. Meadows, it's 1:40, and go ahead and use it as a close.
Based on a timeline you gave us, on May 29, 2012, the audit briefed the IG in advance of the IRS Commissioner's meeting. May 30th, IG and function heads briefed the IRS Commissioner, Doug Shulman, and the Deputy Commissioners, Steve Miller and Beth Tucker, on the audit, specifically that criteria targeting Tea Party patriots or 912, another key word, and other policies issues were being used in reviewing applications for tax-exempt status. You briefed, and that's your notes. Yes, correct.
And so what you say on May 30th is, yeah, they're targeting these groups. That's a confirmation. You've reached the conclusion they're targeting using these key words.
Yes. Now, just to be clear, I didn't take these notes up, but the dates are accurate.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I'm just using these because they were delivered to us from your staff. So on May 30th, there was a there, and you briefed Mr. Shulman and two others. On June 4th, you went on.
So Ms. Tucker, your testimony does not agree with that testimony. So who is right?
When you asked me the earlier question, you asked me, was I present at the briefing that Mr. George gave the Internal Revenue Service? I recall being at that briefing.
Your testimony, what your testimony said, Ms. Tucker, was that this was a normal briefing talking about an audit. This was obviously results of which you said that it was just talking about going to conduct an audit.
Sir, if I could, TIGDA comes in to Internal Revenue Service monthly. Mr. George, and we will be glad to try and produce this, Mr. George briefs Internal Revenue Service on multiple topics at each one of those meetings. To the best of my recollection, his discussion of their investigation of TEG was only one of the topics that I recollect from that briefing. Let me also be clear. When Mr. George communicated to the Internal Revenue Service, to the best of my recollection, about concerns with the BOLO list, and the terms that he was talking about, it was then the agency's response, as the investigation is underway right now, to say, yes, use of those BOLO terms are inappropriate. That's why there's an investigation underway to get to the bottom of what the facts are, sir.
But you had already had an internal investigation that already indicated that concluded on the first part of May. So why would that be a surprise?
Sir, I was not privy to any of the internal investigation.
But Mr. Miller was.
Mr. Miller is the Deputy Commissioner, or was the
My
Deputy
time's expired. I appreciate the indulgence.
Would the gentleman yield for just a second?
Yes.
Ms. Tucker, hopefully I can bring a common answer here. So I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, but let me try to paraphrase. The IG said there was a there in that meeting. You saw the video. You were in the meeting. You heard it. But your testimony today seems to be primarily that regardless of that, you said to yourself, there's a process, it's going to go forward, and it's not my job because it's not within my lane. Is that a fair paraphrasing of this series of questions and answers?
Yes, sir, because the Deputy Commissioner structure at the Internal Revenue Service, just as if TIGTA was there giving feedback on an audit or report that's about to be issued, then the responsibility for the follow-up actions, just like the report someone referenced earlier today, the purchase card audit. TIGTA briefed IRS a couple of months back in one of these monthly meetings and said, we have done an audit of the purchase cards. Here is what our findings show, that 99.75% of the purchase cards used at IRS are correct. But there are some concerns. That is my takeaway. I own that in my role at IRS. It is my job to then follow up and make sure corrective actions take place.
Go ahead, Mr. Cummings.
Yeah, I just want to, just to clarify, I just want to be real clear. First of all, Ms. Tucker, I've been sitting here watching you, just listening, and I just want you to know I believe you. I don't know what that means to you, but it means a lot to me.
It means a lot to me, sir.
I believe you. And the reason why I say that is, as I understand it, IRS, you got a top person, and then you've got 2 deputies. And I think you've tried to explain it to us probably 10 times now, is that you are on one side dealing with IT and all this stuff, and I guess more like the nuts and bolts.
Yes, sir.
And the other side deals with things like what?
Like the your tax administration, audits, collections.
Mm-hmm. And so, just going back to what the chairman was just asking. So when you hear, even when you hear this stuff that's regarding guessing, I guess you're sitting there saying, okay, you know, that is not good, but I'm zeroing in what I'm supposed to do. How many employees come under you?
Roughly 11,000.
11,000, you're 11,000 employees and all your responsibilities. So so it's not that you didn't care, is that right?
No, sir. And I'm troubled if that is the impression that some on the committee are taking away from this. To the best of my recollection, and again, IRS is a very large organization. TIGTA and GAO do multiple oversight audits for Internal Revenue Service. They are in briefing the commissioner and the 2 deputies monthly, if not more often. In light of recent events, Mr. George and his team are now coming in weekly to brief on issues. Based on my recollection of what was shared at that meeting, Mr. George was talking about an audit of TG. He also was talking about concerns. It was my takeaway, based on that meeting, that IRS would then be taking appropriate action to deal with that. Not that it was something that was in my responsibility to leave the room and begin working with folks in TG or elsewhere to take any action. And I implore you, that is not me trying to shirk responsibilities. That is me focusing on what my responsibilities are at Internal Revenue.
Thank you very much, Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Jordan, does that answer your question, or do you have further follow-up?
If I could, Mr. Chairman, I appreciate what...
Gentleman's recognized for last round.
I thank the Chairman for his indulgence. I appreciate what the ranking member said, but the gravity of what took place here, it seemed to me everyone in a position of influence would want to come forward and set the record straight. If I could quickly, Mr. Chairman, I just want to put up one email that... This is an email from March 9th, 2012, Mr. Floyd Williams, in response to an inquiry from Senator Hatch about the 501c4 situation. And the FYI, it's copied to all these folks, but it says, latest volley in the 501c4 battle. And I think it's important to note who was copied on this email. Ms. Tucker was copied, Sarah Ingram, Nancy Marks, Lois Lerner, Steve Miller, Ms. Tucker said she had this is not her area. She had nothing to do with it. And yet 2 months prior, she's getting the latest in the battle about the 501c4 scandal that's going on. And yet today she continues to say it had nothing to do with her. If it had nothing to do with her, why is she copied in on an email that focuses in on this very issue 2 months prior to when she said she first heard about it? With that, I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Well, the gentlelady may answer. I think there was a question there.
Yes, sir. So our legislative affairs function routinely copies the commissioners and deputy commissioners on correspondence that's underway between Congress. That is not an unusual situation.
Why is the term battle used?
I have no idea, sir.
Okay, thank you.
I thank the gentleman. Mr. Cummings.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank all of our witnesses for being here today. Mr. Castillo, I must tell you that your testimony is alarming, and it concerns me greatly, and I'm sure as it does other members of this committee. While I said it in a kind of joking way when I referred to Michael Jackson's song, Man in the Mirror, I really, and when I read your testimony and then I listened to what you said, I got to tell you, you got to look closer in the mirror. And, you know, I tell my kids, I tell them, whenever you're constantly complaining that people are doing you wrong, I said, sometimes you need to look at yourself if you consistently find yourself in that position. And so but the main thing is that I think we need to try to straighten this mess out. And I'm glad, Ms. Tucker, that you all are taking the steps that you all are taking. Our country is, I think we deserve a strong program. I was just telling the chairman about how much I admired his ability to do business and come from a small company and to make it successful. And I want everybody to have those kinds of opportunities to open the door, but they'll never get there if we abuse programs that's to help them get there. And so I just hope that when you go back, Ms. Tucker, you will reiterate that to your people, looking at all of these procurements, and so that we can have that balance, so that we can actually help people achieve their great dreams, and not be like the people that I talked about in my opening statement, who worked so hard for so long, pushing, knocking at doors, trying to get to opportunity, and then they die before they get there. And so the dreams are locked up in the casket with them. And so with that, I want to thank you, Mr. Chairman, and again, I think it was a good hearing.
I thank you, Mr. Cummings. In closing, often a hearing is about a specific action, and Ms. Tucker, it appears as though a great deal will come as a result of the preparation for this hearing and the report we put out. I'm going to work with the ranking member to turn it into a full committee report. It's essentially a staff draft at this point. And we will follow on with some of what we learned here today. But I'm going to include, in all likelihood, in that report or an additional series of letters, a number of things that I could not help but recognize today. Ms. Tucker, I think to say that the IRS is an organization currently in crisis is a given. I have some confidence and a lot of hope that the new commissioner, acting commissioner, will in fact be able to bring that about. And for the 100,000 or so career professionals that work at the IRS, I wish you well in doing that. It's important to the American people. Mr. Castillo, this is not about you, but in fact, this hearing, I believe, was illustrative of some problems that our government has. Mr. Floor, I believe that our committee is going to be sending a number of things, and Ms. Duckworth will undoubtedly be working on it with us. And that is that in a time of limited resources, we do need to define service-connected disabled in a way that doesn't automatically trigger virtually every American who served, myself included, from qualifying. We also need to be better and more consistent on whether or not, and we can legally empower you to be more accurate. Ms. Duckworth was correct that a strain, a crack, a twisted ankle 27 years later that clearly didn't impair the performance of somebody going through their life. If we were dealing with workers' comp, we would not be as generous as to turn that into $6,000 a year for the rest of their life and other benefits. There's no question this is far greater in the current dollars than I think the taxpayers believe for what the record appears to show. That's not to take away from the legitimacy of an application, but Congress has an obligation to work with the Veterans Administration to get these numbers better. At the same time, I know you're acutely aware that we are dismayed at how long our Iraq veterans and Afghanistan veterans are waiting to get a determination. Mr. Chodos, the fact is you got a little bit of a pass here today, but I must tell you that I'm disturbed that the process and the numbers are such that without either regulation changing or coming to Congress with a series of changes that you need, we're not accurately reflecting hub zones. We're not accurately reflecting the real benefit that is going to the people that Mr. Cummings and I want to see get it. Now, much of it may be legislative, but I would charge you to go back to your Cabinet secretaries and say, you know, we owe Congress some proposed changes, whether it's cost savings or it's benefit being more targeted. You know, I believe that this is part of what this hearing is showing. There clearly were some violations of the rules, some incorrect statements made. But I think even if none of those were made, we still would probably, from this side of the dais on a unanimous basis, have seen a travesty of what was intended versus what was allowed, what was achieved versus what was scored. So I would hope that as you go back today, that recognize that we will send at a minimum letters asking you to be part of the process of getting the reform. I thank Mr. Sisk. The GAO is our partner in our branch, and it's critical that we have your support. You're constantly bringing us some of these items and high risk. Perhaps you will be, and your organization, on behalf of those of us in Congress, will be a hub for a lot of this. But it's the intention of this chairman to bring to the committees of jurisdictions specific recommendations for change that could narrow or prevent this from happening in the future. I want to thank you all for your testimony today. Ms. Tucker, I'll close only with one thing. A message, I think, for the IRS, and it's a message for the IRS, for the State Department, and for every part of government. This committee, over my short tenure as chairman, has a consistent frustration, and that is messages are received that should alert people. Often it's not within their lane, it's not their job, but it still bothers us that every single American worker in the Federal Government doesn't say, well, we've got to get the truth out there. The world is seeing this NSA crisis right now with a vague suggestion that somehow it's because nobody was listening. This committee is listening. We want to hear. Every Federal employee owes it to Congress and to the American taxpayer to be a whistleblower if they see something wrong, even if it's as benign as an acting commissioner saying we're not targeting, and then they become aware in some way that there's a likelihood that they are targeting and that Congress is not aware that they've been misled. That was true for 10 months with Fast and Furious. It was true for a similar period of time here with the IRS and the targeting. And I believe that we're still dealing with trying to get to the whole truth with Benghazi. So those are outside of today's hearing, but I think you get the point that I'm calling on every Federal worker to recognize that this Congress passed a major new whistleblower legislation so that we could invite people to call your congressman, write your congressman, or come to the committees and tell us if you have some doubt. It's okay to be wrong as a whistleblower. It's really wrong to keep a secret that you think is wrongdoing. Lastly, I would be remiss if I didn't mention that every part of government has an Inspector General, and the IGs are the first and most logical report to by Federal workers, and I hope they will always do that. And with that, I thank Mr. Cummings, and we stand adjourned.